Despite the opening of secret archives, the testimonies of survivors, and decades of dedicated research by historians, some mysteries of the Second World War remain unanswered. Intriguing questions continue to arouse the curiosity of experts and enthusiasts, revealing that not everything about this conflict has been completely uncovered. In this video, you will discover some of these hidden enigmas. On the night of May 10, 1941, one of the most enigmatic episodes of the Second World War took shape in the skies over Europe. A German Messerschmitt Bf-110 aircraft crossed the darkness, coming from Germany toward Scotland. Shortly after 11 p.m., the plane ran out of fuel, and its pilot, forced to bail out, parachuted into a field in the Paisley area in the Scottish Highlands. Farmer David McLean, upon hearing the noise, found the aircraft in flames on his land. Nearby, he located the pilot, who, surprisingly, introduced himself as Captain Alfred Horn. Taken to the McLean family home, the man was given a cup of tea by the fireplace. But he was no ordinary Luftwaffe pilot. He was none other than Rudolf Hess, deputy leader of the Nazi Party, and one of Adolf Hitler's closest men. Hess's presence on British soil caused perplexity. He was not just any deserter, but the deputy Führer, positioned immediately below Hermann Göring in the succession hierarchy of the Nazi regime. A companion of Hitler since the early days, Hess had participated in the Beer Hall Putsch in 1923, been imprisoned with him in Landsberg, and served as Hitler's personal secretary during the writing of Mein Kampf. His arrival in Scotland was not an act of war, but rather a peace mission, as he himself declared. The objective was to seek contact with British leaders who, he believed, would be willing to negotiate an agreement with Nazi Germany in opposition to Winston Churchill's policy of resistance. Hess's intended destination was Dungavel House, residence of the Scottish aristocrat Duke of Hamilton, whom he believed to be a favorable interlocutor for peace. The boldness of the flight alone would have been enough to make it legendary. Taking off from an airfield near Munich around 6 p.m., Hess flew alone for nearly 5 hours. With rudimentary maps and without modern navigation equipment, he followed the Rhine River route, crossed the North Sea, and entered British airspace at night. He had to avoid not only losing orientation in the midst of fog, but also the British air defense systems, always alert to German bombers. He reached Scotland around 10:30 p.m., but without enough fuel to continue. Only 20 kilometers from Dungavel House, he was forced to jump. Hess's technical ability in conducting such a journey surprised his captors. It was unlikely that a high-ranking Nazi official, without training as a long-range pilot, could have managed to get so far without being shot down. As soon as he was detained, Hess insisted repeatedly on being taken to the Duke of Hamilton, whom he considered part of a British group willing to negotiate. However, the aristocrat, far from being a collaborator, was in command of an RAF base that night, and upon being informed of the capture, demonstrated total loyalty to the British cause. When the meeting finally took place the next day, Hess laid out his proposal. Germany did not wish to destroy the British Empire. In exchange for a peace agreement that would remove the United Kingdom from the war, Hitler would guarantee the preservation of its colonies and imperial prestige. In return, the Reich would have its hands free for the conquest of continental Europe and, above all, for the future offensive against the Soviet Union. But Hamilton was not swayed. He immediately communicated the proposal to Churchill and the British government, who promptly rejected it. For London, any peace on Hitler's terms would mean the capitulation of Europe before Nazism. Hess's situation became dramatic. By declaring that Hitler was unaware of his mission, believing that this would have him treated as an independent negotiator, he only succeeded in having the British government classify him as a common prisoner of war without diplomatic immunity. The news that Hitler's right-hand man had flown alone to Britain fell like a bomb in Berlin. the Ministry of Propaganda, under Joseph Goebbels, quickly announced that Hess suffered from mental disturbances and hallucinations, and that his action had been an individual act, without any connection to the Führer. Behind the scenes, however, Hess's flight only accelerated the rise of Martin Bormann, Hitler's personal secretary, who definitively assumed the role of the party's chief organizer. For many Nazis, Hess's mission was interpreted as a desperate attempt to regain relevance within a regime where his influence was already in decline. Still, doubts persisted. Had Hitler truly been unaware of the plan? Despite the official version, the episode has always fueled alternative theories. Some contemporaries believed that Hitler might secretly have supported Hess's mission. In 2011, Russian documents revealed the testimony of Karl-Heinz Pinch, Hess's aide, who claimed that Hitler had prior knowledge of the trip. According to him, the Führer expected Hess to negotiate an agreement before the invasion of the Soviet Union. The authenticity of the testimony, however, is questioned. Pinch gave his statement under Soviet custody, possibly under torture, and Moscow had political reasons to promote the idea of collusion between Germany and Britain. Most historians consider it more likely that Hitler was genuinely surprised and enraged. Another hypothesis suggests that Hess was manipulated by British intelligence. Some argue that M446, the British Secret Intelligence Service, may have fed him false hopes of contact with pro-peace factions, perhaps even sending misleading correspondence in the name of the Duke of Hamilton. This version would explain why Hess was so convinced he would find receptivity in Scotland. However, no concrete evidence has ever surfaced to confirm such an operation. The involvement of the Duke of Hamilton has always been the subject of speculation. Educated at Eton and Oxford, heir to an aristocratic family and an RAF officer, he had indeed maintained occasional contacts with figures sympathetic to Germany before the war, but nothing that would support an alignment with Nazism. Even so, MI5, the United Kingdom's security service, documents declassified in 2004 revealed that in 1940, Hess's advisor, Albrecht Haushofer, had sent a letter to Hamilton proposing peace talks in a neutral location. The correspondence was intercepted by British intelligence, which investigated Hamilton and cleared him. Curiously, the letter never reached its destination, but it reinforces the idea that Hess believed, perhaps naively, that Hamilton could be a mediator. Some conspiracy theorists, however, maintain that Hess's flight was deliberately encouraged by the British as part of a trap. Journalist Peter Padfield in Hess, Hitler, and Churchill points to evidence that British agents may have fueled the illusion that there was a political faction willing to negotiate peace, when in reality, that pro-appeasement wing had already completely lost its influence since 1940. The American Mercury, a U.S. magazine, published an anonymous article in 1943 claiming that Hess had flown with explicit orders from Hitler and that he had even been escorted by the RAF in his final moments of flight. Though unlikely, the report fueled speculation during the war. After his capture, Hess was held in various locations in Britain, including the Tower of London and military hospitals. British psychiatrists examined him repeatedly, both out of medical concern and in the hope of better understanding the Nazi mindset. Many diagnosed signs of mental disorders, feeding the version that his mission had been the result of hallucinations or irrational impulses. At the Nuremberg trials in 1945, Hess was tried alongside other Nazi leaders. Declared guilty of crimes against peace, he escaped the death penalty, but was sentenced to life imprisonment. He spent the rest of his life in Spandau, a maximum security prison in Berlin controlled by the victorious powers. After 1966, he became the prison's only inmate, living in isolation for more than 2 decades until his death in 1987, at the age of 93. Officially, he committed suicide by hanging himself with an electrical cord. However, his family, including his son Wolf Hess, claimed that he had been murdered to prevent embarrassing revelations about his 1941 mission. Rudolf Hess died in 1987 at the age of 93. officially by suicide. Even his death gave rise to new theories, some suggesting that he may have been assassinated. Over 4 decades of imprisonment, he never fully clarified the motivations for his fateful 1941 mission. Hess's flight remains one of the most mysterious episodes of World War II. For some, it was the desperate gesture of a man in decline, driven by illusions and mental disorders. For others, it may have been part of a deeper political game, whose true backstage dealings remain hidden. In May 1945, Berlin was nothing more than a smoldering skeleton of concrete and steel. The war in Europe was coming to an end amid chaos, and while the city collapsed into ruins, one of the most feared men of the Third Reich vanished without a trace. Heinrich Müller, head of the Gestapo, the Nazi regime's dreaded secret police, evaporated from the historical record. His last appearance took place in the command bunker on the night of May 1st, in the company of the last surviving Nazi leaders. Witnesses recalled his almost clinical calm and a chilling phrase, "I will not be captured by the Russians." After that, he disappeared completely. No document, testimony, or reliable clue managed to trace Müller, making him the highest-ranking Reich official whose fate remains a mystery to this day. Unlike Goebbels or Himmler, Müller was never a public figure. His power lay in the dark corridors of bureaucracy and repression. Born on April 28, 1900, in Munich, he grew up in a politically unstable and nationalist Germany. A pilot in World War I, he returned home hardened, joining the Bavarian police, where he stood out for his ruthless efficiency in persecuting communists and dissidents. This reputation caught the attention of the Nazi high command. Himmler and Heinrich saw in Müller an enforcer without moral restraints. By 1939, he was already leading the Gestapo, reporting first to Heinrich and, after Heinrich's death, to Himmler. Müller was neither ideological nor charismatic. He was a cold administrator, turning orders into lethal operations. From his base in Berlin, he directed prisons, brutal interrogations, Jewish deportations, and political surveillance. Reports produced under his supervision went directly to Hitler and the SS, determining the fate of thousands. His power lay in efficiency, not visibility. With the approach of the Red Army in April 1945, the Reich was collapsing. Many officers chose to flee or commit suicide. Müller remained firm in the bunker. After May 1st, no reliable record ever mentioned his presence again. The devastated city and the war's end turned his figure into a historical specter. Immediately after the conflict ended, the Allies began searching for Müller. Teams combed through Berlin, interrogating former colleagues and sifting through destroyed files. The difficulty was practical. Heinrich Müller was a common name, and dozens of namesakes confused the investigations. For years, Americans and Britons monitored contacts and family members, searched homes, and intercepted letters. No concrete evidence emerged. With the Cold War, attention shifted, but the search was never officially closed. Over the decades, countless theories arose. Some claimed Müller had been taken by the NKVD to Moscow, collaborating with the Soviet secret police. Others suggested he had escaped to the West, protected by the Americans. Walter Schellenberg, a Reich intelligence officer, mentioned in his memoirs a possible transfer of Müller to the USSR, but nothing was confirmed. The capture of Adolf Eichmann in 1960 reignited interest. Eichmann, Müller's direct subordinate, had hidden for 15 years before being located. During interrogations, he said he believed his former chief was still alive, leading to new investigations, unsuccessful once again. Short pause. Many historians suggest that Müller probably died in the ruins of the German capital, either by suicide or in combat. The absence of an identified body fueled speculation for decades. A Polish deserter in 1961 claimed that Müller had been taken to Moscow as a collaborator, but no proof ever emerged. In the 2000s, CIA archives and archaeological investigations attempted to shed light on his fate. In 2013, Documents indicated that Müller might have been buried in a mass grave in the Jewish cemetery of Berlin-Mitte, but the absence of material evidence kept the mystery alive. Japan's path toward domination of Asia, both in the years leading up to World War II and during the conflict itself, revolved around the figure of Emperor Hirohito. As sovereign, he was the supreme symbol of the Japanese state, and under his rule, the country embarked on an aggressive expansionist campaign, marked by a series of atrocities that became some of the most terrible in modern history. For decades, scholars have debated Hirohito's true role. Was he merely a symbolic presence without real power, or an active participant in military actions and the crimes committed? Recent research points to something in between, but with concrete responsibility. Although he did not wield absolute power, Hirohito was not innocent. Documents and accounts indicate that he had full knowledge of the actions of his army and, in some cases, gave direct consent for serious violations of the laws of war. Japanese expansionism was born from the combination of imperialist ambitions and militarism rooted in state ideology. In official Shintoism, Hirohito was seen as a divine figure, a leader whose command demanded unconditional obedience. This belief reinforced the idea of Japanese supremacy and justified expansion across the Asian continent. As early as the 1930s, Japan occupied Manchuria, 1931, and invaded China, 1937, moves that counted on the emperor's approval, culminating in 1941 with the attack on the Wester. The expansion campaign was accompanied by extreme violence. Japanese troops carried out massacres, looting, forced labor, torture, and slavery. By the end of the war, millions of civilians and prisoners had been killed under the authority of a sovereign revered as divine. A symbolic example of these atrocities occurred in Nanjing, the Chinese capital, captured by the Japanese army in December 1937. For weeks, thousands of civilians and prisoners were murdered. Estimates range from 100,000 to 200,000 deaths. Although Hirohito was not present at the site, his decisions created the environment that allowed such brutality. In August of that same year, he ratified a proposal from the army that removed restrictions of international law regarding the treatment of Chinese prisoners, granting carte blanche for the laws of war to be ignored. Hirohito's direct command also manifested in the protection of key figures involved in the atrocities. Prince Yasuhiko Asaka, the emperor's uncle, commanded troops in Nanjing and likely ordered mass executions. After the war, Asaka faced no punishment, protected by immunity granted by the American occupiers, thanks to Hirohito's cooperation with the occupation led by Douglas MacArthur. Thus, while millions suffered, some perpetrators lived without consequences, shielded by the weight of the imperial crown. Another dark chapter involved biological warfare. Unit 731 in Manchuria carried out lethal human experiments since 1936 under Hirohito's personal authorization, disguised as an epidemic prevention program. Thousands of prisoners were subjected to torture and cruel deaths. Hirohito received reports about the unit's activities and authorized its expansion, validating the use of chemical and biological weapons. After the war, leaders of Unit 731 were protected by the Americans in exchange for scientific data, and the emperor's role remained hidden. History shows that Hirohito was neither a passive puppet nor an absolute tyrant. He demonstrated the capacity to command. In 1936, he intervened to thwart a military coup, showing that he had authority over his officers. In 1941, he appointed Hideki Tojo as prime minister, consolidating the government's militarist stance. He also consented to actions that violated the laws of war, such as the use of poison gas against Chinese forces, while at the same time avoiding its use against Western countries out of fear of retaliation. With Japan's surrender in August 1945, the Allies faced the dilemma of holding Hirohito accountable. Initially equated with Hitler and Mussolini in Allied propaganda, the emperor was ultimately protected by the United States, which saw him as a useful figure to maintain order and contain the spread of communist ideologies. Pressure from countries like Australia was not enough to bring Hirohito to trial. The Tokyo tribunal focused on leaders such as Tojo and other generals, while evidence of the emperor's involvement was deliberately concealed. Japanese officials destroyed documents, and reports about orders in Nanjing or Unit 731 were conveniently ignored. The official post-war narrative portrayed him as a monarch deceived by military advisors, an image that shaped public perception for decades. Hirohito remained on the throne, never being held accountable, and his reputation as a passive leader dominated historical memory for years. However, new research and evidence show that he had direct participation and complicity in brutal actions. Due to the destruction of records and the post-war policy of silence, uncertainty remains about the full extent of his responsibility, leaving a legacy marked by mysteries and controversies over his role in Japan's war crimes. In the final chapters of the North African campaign during World War II, a legend arose that persists to this day: the disappearance of a large quantity of gold and jewels looted from Jewish communities in Tunisia, supposedly transported by an SS unit linked to Erwin Rommel's campaign. This story blends historical facts with myth, fascinating treasure hunters and historians over the decades. The origin of the legend lies in real events. In 1943, during the German occupation of Tunisia, as the Afrika Korps retreated after its defeat at El Alamein, SS Colonel Walter Rauff commanded brutal actions against Tunisian Jews. His troops systematically plundered the population, confiscating gold, jewels, and other valuables. A documented example occurred on the island of Djerba, where approximately 43 kilograms of gold were taken from the local community. Attacks in other cities, such as Sfax, Gabes, Sousse, and Tunis, resulted in more than 100 kilograms of gold, in addition to silver and precious stones, turning the looting into significant spoils for the Third Reich. At the beginning of 1943, the Axis situation in North Africa was collapsing. Rommel was forced to retreat from Libya, and in May, the last German troops in Tunisia surrendered. With imminent defeat, the Germans attempted to withdraw their treasures before they fell into Allied hands. Evidence suggests that Ralph and his unit transported the looted gold to North Africa during the retreat, possibly to Italy or Corsica, then under Axis occupation. Reports indicate that Ralph took part in a secret mission to Corsica with his men, transporting the loot. According to legend, SS officers sank 6 crates of gold, silver, and jewels in the Mediterranean Sea to recover later. Some versions claim this was done deliberately to protect the treasure. Others suggest that Allied bomber attacks forced the Germans to throw the cargo into the sea. Regardless of the version, the missing crates never reached their final destination. It is important to stress that Rommel probably had no direct involvement with the treasure. His name is associated with the legend because the looting occurred during his North African campaign, and because the figure of the desert fox captured the popular imagination. Historically, the confiscated gold was the work of Ralph and the SS, with no evidence of Rommel's participation. Historian Klaus Michael Malmann noted that Rommel and Ralph probably never met, but the dramatic narrative of the desert fox and the hidden treasure proved irresistible. The myth gained strength after the war. In June 1948, former SS member Walter Kerner was arrested in Corsica and confessed to having sunk 6 crates of gold off the island's coast. He presented a hand-drawn map indicating the location of the crates. The French government organized a diving expedition, but nothing was found. Moreover, later records showed that Kerner could not have been in Corsica at the time, casting doubt on the veracity of his account. Nevertheless, historians believe he possessed real information, possibly obtained from someone involved. Kerner continued promoting the story, exaggerating amounts and details, even claiming he knew the location of 4 tons of gold. AQ. The mystery entered popular culture. Ian Fleming, author of James Bond, became interested in the treasure when he discovered intelligence files indicating the disappearance of gold destined for Berlin. Fleming incorporated Rommel's treasure into his novel 007 on Her Majesty's Secret Service, 1963. At the same time, real treasure hunters sought the 6 crates in Corsica. A notable expedition in 1963, led by millionaire Edwin Link and Lord John Kilbrain, was interrupted by threats from the Corsican mafia. In the 21st century, interest persisted. In 2007, German divers used advanced technology to search for metallic signals in Corsica, but without success. British researcher Terry Hodkinson claimed to have located the treasure after 15 years of study near the city of Bastia, but also found nothing. The historical consensus is that the looted gold from Tunisia did exist, confirmed by records and testimonies of survivors. It is likely that the treasure sank in the Mediterranean in 1943 or was secretly recovered in the post-war period. Theories suggest that former SS members or French collaborators may have tried to appropriate it, keeping the mystery alive to this day. During World War II, Nazi Germany dedicated scientific efforts to the exploration of nuclear energy, motivated by the desire to develop weapons capable of decisively altering the course of the conflict. The objective was to create a weapon of mass destruction that would consolidate German military superiority. However, despite the prestige of the scientists involved and the pressure of the war effort, the German nuclear program remained fragmented, poorly coordinated, and much smaller in scale when compared to the Manhattan Project, conducted by the United States, which would culminate in the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Nevertheless, persistent rumors suggest that, in the last months of the war, Germany might have carried out a test of a primitive nuclear device on its territory in a desperate attempt to reverse the imminent collapse. The German nuclear program had 2 main protagonists. Werner Heisenberg, a renowned theoretical physicist known for developing the uncertainty principle, led the theoretical part, designing the mathematical foundations for the nuclear chain reaction. At the same time, Kurt Denner oversaw the practical experiments, seeking to transform Heisenberg's ideas into concrete applications, such as experimental nuclear reactors and isotope separation techniques, assessing the possibility of generating a controlled explosion. Despite the dedication and talent of these scientists, by the end of 1944, Germany had not succeeded in producing a sustained nuclear reaction, nor in generating enough enriched material to build a functional bomb. The shortage of strategic resources, Allied bombings of industrial and research centers, and internal planning failures that diverted efforts to conventional armaments considered more urgent, limited the program's progress. In 1944, the Allies formed a task force to monitor the advance of troops and assess German nuclear capability. Reports indicated that the Germans were far from possessing an operational atomic weapon. This allowed, in April 1945, for strategic facilities such as the partially built reactor at Heinrich to be occupied. Several scientists were captured and taken to England, detained at Farmhall Mansion, where their conversations were secretly recorded. During their stay at Farmhall, the German scientists were surprised by the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. None indicated prior knowledge of nuclear tests, reinforcing the view that Germany had neither developed nor tested an atomic bomb. These records became a historical reference on the true nuclear capacity of the Third Reich. Still, over time, theories emerged involving Jonas Thal in Thuringia. Between 1944 and 1945, the SS built a secret underground complex there, distinct from Heisenberg's nuclear facilities and under direct SS control. The exact function remains uncertain. It could have been a center for advanced research, a last-minute operations base, or a plant for special weapons such as V-2 rockets or other Wunderwaffen. The local commander possessed experience in sophisticated military projects, fueling suspicions of confidential experiments of great impact. The complex was never completed. With the fall of the Reich in the spring of 1945, it was abandoned. American troops occupied the region in April, later passing it on to the Soviets, who turned it into a restricted zone. It is in this context that reports emerge of an alleged nuclear test in March 1945. One of the witnesses, Clara Verer, reported having seen an intense flash followed by a shockwave. Days later, residents supposedly presented symptoms consistent with radiation exposure. Heinz Wachmuth, a local worker, claimed to have cremated bodies with unusual burns, while officers only mentioned a new weapon. Some defenders of the hypothesis cite a Soviet report mentioning explosions with radioactive effects and analyses by historian Rainer Karl, who identified cesium-137 and cobalt-60 in the soil, possibly remnants of tests. However, most scientists remain skeptical. Germany did not have sufficient uranium or plutonium for a full nuclear explosion, suggesting that if anything occurred, it would have been a rudimentary device or a dirty bomb. Official documents and Allied reports do not confirm nuclear tests, and Heisenberg and Denner, when interrogated, were unaware of any prior experiment. In 2006, new analyses at the site did not find abnormal radioactivity, indicating that isotopes previously detected could result from later Soviet activities. Even so, some anomalies remain intriguing, keeping the debate alive about the hidden potential of the German nuclear program. The alleged Jonas Thal test remains one of the greatest enigmas of World War II. It illustrates the complexity of military science under totalitarianism regimes, the difficulty of separating facts from rumors, and the strategic web of interests in the final months of the conflict. The story reinforces that, beyond documentation and rigorous science, there are gray zones in military history where the official record is insufficient, fueling theories, conspiracies, and debates that continue to fascinate researchers. Help us keep this project alive here on YouTube by subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching, God bless you all, and see you soon.